I never thought I'd end up picking up a hitchhiker. It wasn't that I was scared of them or anything. My parents had just drilled it into me that it was always dangerous. I'd seen the news reports about people being murdered by strangers they'd offered a ride to, and I didn't want to become one of those statistics. But something about that rainy night made me reconsider. I was on a lonely stretch of road in the middle of nowhere, 2 hours outside of the nearest town. The rain had been coming down for hours, thick and heavy, the kind of rain that blurs everything beyond a few feet ahead. The wipers on my old sedan were struggling to keep up. My headlights flickered as if they were about to give out, and the road ahead felt endless, dark, and death. My phone was low on battery, and I hadn't seen another car in at least 30 minutes. I was starting to get that creeping feeling of being utterly alone. There wasn't a single house or gas station in sight, just me, my thoughts, and the sound of rain. I glanced at the clock on the dashboard. It was well past midnight. That's when I saw him. I thought I imagined it at first, a figure standing on the side of the road, silhouetted by the glow of the streetlights. But no, as I got closer, I realized it was a man, drenched in the downpour, holding up a cardboard sign that read simply, "East." I slowed my car, my instincts kicking in. The sign was simple, unhelpful. I couldn't even see his face clearly through the rain and the dark, but he looked like he needed help, and that's why I slowed. I didn't know why I stopped. Maybe it was the rain, or maybe it was just the feeling of being so far from anything familiar. But when I rolled down my window slightly and called out, I heard him say, "Thank you, please can you take me east?" He sounded calm, his voice faintly trembling, as if he'd been standing out in the rain too long. I glanced at my gas gauge. Full tank, no rush. "Hop in," I said, making a decision in that moment I would come to regret. The man opened the door and climbed into the passenger seat without a word. He looked normal enough, maybe a little older than I had thought at first, probably in his mid-30 seconds. His hair was dark, and his face had a sort of emptiness about it that I couldn't explain. His clothes were soaked through, jeans, a hoodie, and sneakers that were more suited to a summer day than a downpour. I adjusted the rearview mirror and glanced at him. His eyes were wide, looking straight ahead. He seemed nervous. "You going far?" I asked, trying to break the silence. "Yeah," he muttered, almost too quietly. "As far as you're going?" I nodded, still unsure about him. His nervous energy was contagious. I focused on the road, watching the rain blur the world around us. There was something unsettling about the way he didn't speak much. I tried to make small talk, but his answers were short, clipped. For a while, there was only the sound of the rain hitting the windshield and the hum of the engine. I don't know why, but I glanced at him again. He was staring out the window now, his eyes darting back and forth between the rain-soaked world outside and the rearview mirror. "You okay?" I asked, my voice softer now. He turned to look at me, his gaze sharp, then quickly looked away. "Yeah, just tired." I wanted to ask more, but something in his eyes made me stop. Instead, I focused on the road, watching for any sign of a car or truck passing by. The rain seemed to grow heavier, and the wind picked up, rattling the car. It wasn't long before he spoke again. "Do you believe in ghosts?" His voice was low, almost a whisper, but I heard it clearly over the rain. I looked over at him, startled by the suddenness of the question. "Ghosts?" I repeated, unsure how to answer. "Yeah," he said. "I know it sounds crazy, but there's something out there. Something I've been running." The way he said it made my stomach tighten. "What do you mean?" He didn't answer right away. Instead, he stared out the window again. The silence between us stretched on, broken only by the sound of the rain. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, he spoke again, his voice barely audible. "There's a man who's been following me. He's not human. Not real." I laughed, though it sounded forced. "You mean like a stalker or something?" He shook his head slowly. "No, worse." I wasn't sure if he was serious or if he was just trying to scare me, but I couldn't ignore the cold, eerie tone in his voice. I looked in the rearview mirror. The road behind us was dark and empty, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something wasn't right. Is he still following you?" I asked, my voice tight with unease. The hitchhiker nodded. "Yeah, he's been there every time I've gotten into a car. Just a figure in the distance, watching. Never stops, never says anything. But I know he's there." I forced myself to laugh again, though it came out sounding hollow. "That's a little crazy, don't you think?" But as the words left my mouth, I realized I wasn't laughing at all. I was nervous. My palms were sweating and my heart was beating faster. "Look, I know how this sounds," he continued, "but I'm telling you, I've seen him. I've tried to outrun him, but he keeps showing up." I didn't know what to say. The rain pounded against the roof of the car, making everything feel even more claustrophobic. I glanced at the clock on the dashboard. It was past 2 a.m. now. Suddenly, he sat up straighter in the seat, his eyes wide. "He's here." I looked at him, my heart racing. "Who?" "The man. In the truck. I can feel him." I whipped my head around, scanning the rearview mirror. At first, I didn't see anything, but then I noticed headlights, faint but growing closer. A large black truck. It seemed to come out of nowhere, appearing behind us as if it had been hiding in the dark. "He's following us," the hitchhiker whispered, his voice full of panic. "Don't stop. Whatever you do, don't stop." I could hear the truck now. The low rumble of its engine was unmistakable, and the headlights grew brighter with every passing second. I felt a cold sweat break out on my skin. I pressed the gas pedal harder, but the truck kept gaining on us. Its headlights seemed to grow larger, as if it were coming straight at us. I glanced at the hitchhiker. He was staring out the window, his hands gripping the seat as if he were about to jump out. "Please," he begged, "don't stop. We have to keep going. Don't let him get us." But it was too late. The truck was too close now. I swerved, trying to avoid the oncoming vehicle. But the truck kept pace, matching my every turn. It honked, a long, deafening blast that sent shivers down my spine. I had no idea what was happening. I was in full panic mode now, my heart racing as I desperately tried to outrun the truck. But no matter how fast I drove, it stayed right behind us, its headlights blinding and ominous. And then, without warning, the truck pulled up beside us. I could see the figure in the driver's seat now. A tall man, dressed in black, his face obscured by a dark hood. He didn't move. He didn't speak. He just stared at me through the window, his eyes glowing faintly in the darkness. The hitchhiker let out a strangled scream. "Keep going, don't stop, But I couldn't. The truck swerved and cut me off. We were trapped. And then, everything went black. I woke up to the sound of rain still pouring down, the relentless drumming against the roof of the car. My head ached. I didn't know how long I had been unconscious, but when I opened my eyes, I was no longer in the car. The first thing I noticed was the silence. The rain, the wind, everything was still. I was lying on damp ground, the air thick with the smell of wet earth. It was dark, but not the same kind of dark. It felt oppressive, like the night itself was holding its breath. I sat up quickly, disoriented, my heart racing. I wasn't in my car anymore. I wasn't even on the road. The black truck, the hitchhiker, they were all gone. It was as though everything had vanished, leaving me in the middle of nowhere. I stood up, brushing dirt and wet leaves from my clothes, trying to figure out where I was. There were no streetlights here, no road, just trees stretching high into the dark sky. I stumbled around in a panic, but there was no sign of the car, no sign of anything. "Where am I?" I whispered to myself. "What happened?" My pulse was hammering in my chest. I took a few shaky steps, hoping to find a road or a sign of life, but there was nothing. The forest seemed endless. Every direction looked the same. Trees, shadows, and thick mist rolling in from the ground. Then I remembered the hitchhiker. His words echoed in my mind. "He's not human, not real." I had to find him. He was the only one who might know what was going on, and something told me that if I didn't find him soon, I'd never get the chance to ask. As I moved deeper into the woods, I heard something. A faint sound, almost like a whisper, carried on the wind. I stopped, straining to hear. It was coming from behind me. I turned around, my heart jumping into my throat. Standing there, in the shadows between two trees, was the hitchhiker. His face was pale, his eyes wide and unblinking, but his expression was different. It was emptier than before, like he was no longer fully there. He stepped forward slowly, his movements jerky, unnatural. There was something wrong about him now, something I couldn't quite place. "Don't," I whispered, backing away. He didn't speak, just kept coming, his eyes fixed. Suddenly, a voice, low and gravelly, like it came from the deepest part of the earth, echoed around me. "You shouldn't have." The trees seemed to bend, the shadows growing longer, swallowing the light. The air grew colder, and the whispering voice grew louder, filling the space around. What was happening? He twisted into something darker, his lips stretching into a grim, hollow smile. "You'll see," he said in a voice that wasn't his anymore. "It's too late for you." The sound of tires on wet ground echoed behind me. I turned, and there it was, the black truck, rolling silently down the mist-covered path, its headlights cutting through the dark. But this time, the truck wasn't just a vehicle. It was something else, something monstrous. The truck's grille glowed with an unnatural red hue, like it had a life of its own. I stumbled backward, unable to tear my gaze away from the truck. And that's when I saw him, the man in black, the one from the driver's seat. He wasn't human, not in the way I understood. His eyes were glowing red now, burning with a terrible... I froze, my legs refusing to move. Every part of me screamed to run, but I was rooted to... "You shouldn't have helped him," the man said, his voice low and steady, like he had all the time in the world. I turned to the hitchhiker, my mind racing. "What's going on? Who are you? Who is..." The hitchhiker didn't answer. His lips were parted slightly, as though he were trying to speak, but nothing came out. His eyes widened, filled with fear as the truck rolled to a stop in front of us. "I don't have much time," the hitchhiker said suddenly, his voice cracking. "He'll make you one of them, if you let him." I didn't understand. What did he mean by one of them? And who was this man? "Run," the hitchhiker whispered hoarsely. "Go now." Before I could react, the man in black stepped forward. His movements were unnervingly smooth, too smooth, like he didn't belong in the world at all. "I've been waiting for this moment," he said, his lips curling into a grin that didn't reach his eyes. "It's never too late to add another soul." The world around me seemed to shift. The trees, the air, even the ground beneath my feet, all of it began to warp. I could hear whispers again, but this time they weren't distant. They were right beside me, filling my ears with words I couldn't understand. My vision blurred. I felt dizzy. The hitchhiker lunged forward, grabbing my arm. His grip was ice cold. "Run!" he screamed. "Run now!" I yanked my arm free and sprinted into the woods, my breath coming in ragged gasps, my feet slipping on the wet ground. The whispering voices grew louder, and the light from the truck behind me flickered like it was trying to catch up. I didn't dare look back, but I could hear the truck's engine grow louder, the tires skimming the mud. My legs burned with every step, but I didn't stop. I couldn't stop. There was something behind me, chasing me, something that wouldn't let me go. The woods seemed endless. The night stretched on forever. And yet, I couldn't shake the feeling that no matter how far I ran, the truck was always just behind me, watching, waiting. I don't know how long I ran before I collapsed. I don't know how long I lay there, shivering in the mud, my body shaking from exhaustion and fear. But eventually, the voices stopped. The truck was gone. The darkness seemed to lift, though I knew it was only temporary. The next thing I knew, I was awake again, lying in the front seat of my car. The rain was still falling, but it was lighter now. The world outside seemed normal again, empty, quiet, peaceful. The road was... I rubbed my eyes, trying to make sense of what had just happened. Was it a dream, or was it real? I couldn't tell. But when I looked into the rearview mirror, my breath caught in my throat. There, on the back seat, was the cardboard sign. It read, "East," and beneath it, written in shaky, messy handwriting, "You shouldn't have stopped." I sat frozen, staring at the sign in the back seat, my heart pounding in my chest. The words seemed to blur in front of my eyes, as if they were somehow moving, shifting with the rhythm of my panicked breathing. I wiped the back of my hand across my forehead, trying to convince myself that it was all just a bad dream, a terrifying, vivid nightmare. But as I looked around the car, everything felt too real, too wrong. The rain was lighter now, but the dampness in the air still clung to my skin. My hands trembled as I reached for the rearview mirror again, half expecting to see something else, something more sinister, lurking in the back seat. But there was nothing. No hitchhiker, no black truck, just the sign. I didn't understand. Was I still trapped in some twisted version of reality, or had I somehow escaped? I turned the car's engine back on, feeling the vibrations beneath my fingers. The headlights cut through the mist ahead of me, and the road stretched out, still empty, still lonely. There was no sign of the truck, no shadowy figure watching me. For a moment, everything seemed calm, but the uneasy feeling still lingered, like something was watching from just out of sight. I couldn't shake the hitchhiker's words from my mind. "You shouldn't have stopped." Was it my fault? Was I always meant to be part of this dark, twisted cycle? I didn't know. I didn't understand why I'd stopped in the first place. Maybe I should have kept driving. Maybe I should have listened to the warning. I looked down at the sign one last time, my mind racing. But then something caught my eye, a glimmer of light in the distance. The headlights of another vehicle. Relief flooded over me. Someone else was out here. Maybe they could help. I squinted into the night, watching the approaching headlights grow brighter, closer. My heart slowed as I felt a sense of safety return, but that feeling didn't last long. As the vehicle neared, I saw it clearly. A black truck, the same one, the one from before. My pulse skyrocketed. I couldn't breathe. The truck was right behind me now, its headlights glowing menacingly in my rearview mirror. I slammed my foot on the gas pedal, trying to outrun it once more, but the truck stayed right on my tail, as if it had been waiting for this moment all along. I glanced at the rearview mirror again, and for a brief second I saw a figure in the driver's seat, his face obscured by shadow, the man in black. And then, as if the world itself had shifted, everything around me went dark. The road vanished, the truck vanished, and I was alone. It was late, and the highway stretched out before me like a black ribbon, endless and empty. The radio crackled faintly, unable to pick up a clear station, leaving me with nothing but the low rumble of my car for company. I was halfway through a 6-hour drive back to my small apartment in the city, and exhaustion was setting in. The beam of my headlights caught a figure standing by the roadside, a man, tall and thin, with one hand raised in a gesture for a ride. His clothes were old-fashioned, a dark coat buttoned all the way up, and a hat pulled low over his face. For a moment, I considered driving past. Something about him gave me pause, but the road was lonely and my conscience wouldn't let me leave someone stranded. I slowed to a stop and rolled down the passenger side window. "Need a ride?" He nodded, his face obscured by the shadows of his hat. "Yes, thank you." Without another word, he opened the door and slid into the seat. He moved with a strange stiffness, almost robotic, and didn't offer so much as a glance in my direction. "Where are you headed?" I asked, forcing a casual tone. "Just drive," he replied, his voice low and gravelly. Not exactly the friendliest response, but I shrugged it off. Maybe he'd had a rough night. I put the car in gear and started driving again, the silence between us thick and heavy. The stranger didn't speak, didn't fidget, didn't even seem to breathe. He just sat there, his hands resting on his knees, his face turned toward the window. I couldn't make out much in the dim light, but I noticed his hands were pale, almost unnaturally so, and his nails were long and yellowed. "So," I said, trying to break the tension, "you live around here?" "No." "Okay, not much of a talker." I glanced at him again, uneasy. His hat cast a shadow over his eyes, but I could feel him watching me, even though his head didn't move. The air in the car grew colder. I fiddled with the heater, turning it up, but it didn't seem to make a difference. My breath misted in front of me, and the hairs on the back of my neck stood on end. "Are you feeling cold?" I asked, my voice shaking slightly. He didn't respond. I gripped the steering wheel tighter, my knuckles white. The road ahead was empty, endless, the darkness pressing in on all sides. I glanced at the dashboard clock. It had been stuck on 12:06 for the last 20 minutes. That was impossible. The uneasy silence stretched on, the only sound the faint hum of the tires on the asphalt. My hands were sweating despite the cold, and I had to resist the urge to pull over and kick him out. Something about this man felt wrong. "Hey," I said, my voice trembling. "You never told me your name." Slowly, he turned his head toward me. His face was still shrouded in darkness, but I could see the faint glint of his eyes, cold, empty, like twin voids staring back at me. "I never said you needed to know it." A chill ran down my spine, and I pressed harder on the gas, wanting nothing more than to get him out of my car. The road seemed to stretch on forever, the landmarks I expected to see nowhere in sight. It was as if I was driving in circles. Then he spoke again. You missed the turn. I blinked, my heart racing. What turn? He didn't answer. Instead, he raised a hand and pointed ahead. There. I followed his finger, squinting into the darkness. At first I saw nothing, but then faintly, a side road appeared, a dirt path winding into the woods. I hadn't seen it before. It hadn't been there before. I'm not going down that road, I said, my voice firm despite the fear clawing at my chest. You should, he replied, his tone icy. If you want to get out of here. Against every instinct screaming at me to drive in the opposite direction, I turned onto the path. The car bumped and jostled over the uneven ground, the trees closing in around us like dark sentinels. The stranger didn't move, didn't speak. Finally, the path ended in a small clearing. There was nothing there, just an empty space surrounded by trees. This is where I get out, he said, opening the door. Relief flooded through me, and I nodded quickly. Sure, no problem. He stepped out, his movements eerily smooth, and turned to face me one last time. In the faint glow of the interior light, I saw his face fully for the first time. It was pale and sunken, his skin stretched tight over his bones. His eyes were black voids, and his mouth twisted into a smile that sent a jolt of pure terror through me. Thank you for the ride, he said, his voice dripping with something that wasn't gratitude. He closed the door, and I didn't wait to see what he did next. I slammed my foot on the gas and tore out of the clearing, my heart hammering in my chest. I didn't look back. I didn't want to. When I finally made it back to the main road, the clock on the dashboard flickered back to life, 1:17 a.m. My breath came in short gasps, and my hands shook on the wheel. I don't know who or what I picked up that night, but every time I pass that stretch of road, I drive a little faster, praying I'll never see him again. It was a night of perfect darkness. The moon hid behind thick clouds, and the only light came from my car's high beams as they cut through the unending stretch of highway. I was on my way home after a long shift at work, eager to crawl into bed. The road was empty, just me and the faint hum of my car's engine. Then, I saw her. A young woman stood on the side of the road, her figure illuminated by the headlights. She was shivering, clutching a thin shawl around her shoulders. Her clothes were simple, a white dress, damp and clinging to her frame as though she'd been caught in a storm. I slowed down, my instinct to help kicking in. Who would be out here in the middle of nowhere, alone at this hour? I rolled down the window as I pulled up beside her. You okay? Need a ride? Her eyes met mine, dark, wide, and filled with something I couldn't quite place. Relief? Fear? Yes, please, she said softly, her voice trembling. She got in without another word, sinking into the passenger seat. She smelled faintly of rain and wildflowers. Where are you headed? I asked, trying to keep my voice light. Just up the road, she replied, her gaze fixed out the windshield. The ride was silent for a while. She sat perfectly still, her hands folded neatly in her lap. I tried to make small talk, asking if she lived nearby, if she needed to call anyone, but she only gave short, vague answers. Something about her unsettled me, but I told myself it was just the eerie setting, the empty highway, the fog that seemed to creep closer with every passing mile, the isolation of the night. Then she spoke. Do you believe in destiny? The question caught me off guard. I guess? Why do you ask? She turned to look at me, her expression unreadable. Sometimes people end up exactly where they're meant to be, even if they don't know why. A chill ran down my spine. I forced a smile and kept my eyes on the road. Right. Well, let's make sure you get where you're supposed to, GGO. She didn't respond. We drove in silence for a few more minutes before she spoke again. This time so softly I almost didn't hear her. Be careful at the next turn. What? I asked, glancing at her. But she wasn't there. The passenger seat was empty. I slammed on the brakes, my heart racing. The car screeched to a stop in the middle of the road. I twisted around, frantically searching the back seat, the roadside, the rearview mirror, but she was gone. No door had opened. No sound had indicated she'd left. And then I saw it. Up ahead, just around the bend she had warned me about, a massive tree had fallen across the road. If I hadn't stopped, I would have crashed straight into it. I sat there, my hands shaking on the steering wheel, staring at the fallen tree. My breath fogged up the windshield as I tried to process what had just happened. I never saw her again, but sometimes, when I'm driving down that stretch of road late at night, I catch a glimpse of a figure in white standing by the side of the highway. I don't stop anymore.